If you're just joining us, we're live here from Parliament where around 1,000 anti-government protesters are heading to the Beehive to put the government through what they're calling their People's Court and deliver a verdict this afternoon. But as you can see behind me, a large group of counter-protesters are rallying in preparation for that other group of protesters to arrive. If you are just joining us, we're live here from Parliament where around 1,000 anti-government protesters are on their way to the Beehive. They're being led by Tamaki. As you can see, pictures of a large counter-protest that's gathered here outside Parliament awaiting their arrival. Now they are marching down the streets of Wellington on their way. They started that march from the Civic Square this morning. Once they arrive here, they will be met with the group of counter-protesters who have started to hype up. They're cheering, they have signs. There have been a little bit of tension this morning between them and a number of protesters who arrived early. But there is a strong police presence here, and Tamaki has told his group not to engage with the counter-protesters and to leave those issues up to police. A number of the protesters are starting to file in at the Parliament steps while they're still walking through from coming up through Lambton Quay, going past that large group of counter-protesters, walking right around Parliament and gathering where they've set up a stage and some speakers. They're playing music, and we expect Tamaki, who's leading the protest today, to speak shortly. As you can see, that large group of anti-government protesters have now made their way to Parliament. They've marched from the Civic Square this morning in Wellington. They've filtered onto Parliament's lawns where you can see a stage and speakers have been set up. There are around 1,000 protesters here today being led by Tamaki. He has said multiple times that they do not intend to occupy Parliament's grounds overnight, as they did during that 23-day protest now 6 months ago. He said they will also de-escalate any violence. There is a strong police presence here, though, outside Parliament, around the streets. A number of streets have continued to be shut off today while these protesters marched through Wellington to get here to the Beehive. For those unsure of what the purpose of this protest is today, they want to force a snap election. So they're putting the government through what they're calling the People's Court. It's a bit difficult to see at this stage, but there is a makeshift courthouse set up down on the stage outside Parliament steps. They're then going to deliver their verdict at around 1:30 this afternoon. Tamaki has asked both Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins to come out and speak to protesters. Several people in the Beehive can be seen looking down at the protest across several floors. But the Prime Minister told media yesterday she had no intention of interacting or speaking with the protesters today. As you can see, the few thousand protesters settling into Parliament's lawns. A number of them have put camping chairs up and getting comfortable for the afternoon's verdict. Today, protesters are much calmer in contrast to that occupation earlier this year. Tamaki, who's leading the protest, said they have no intention of making things violent. They would like to keep it a peaceful protest. Their mock trial is sitting now. They have heard from a number of witnesses this afternoon, and they are charging the government with crimes against humanity. They will deliver a verdict shortly.
Upset now, will there be another major earthquake? Problem now, whatever, this government cannot pull us out of it. They have wasted billions.
The coalition said their People's Court on Parliament steps is for crimes against Kiwis. It's time to coincide when Parliament is sitting. And the protest organisers say they intend to present a vote of no confidence and challenge the opposition to call for the same before forcing a snap election. As you might be able to hear, the verdict is about to come in. The crowd have just all yelled guilty. Tamaki is back on the mic addressing the protesters. This is part of their mock trial here today at the People's Court.
Will the jury please give me their full attention?
Tamaki has just called the jury.
The jury please give me their full attention.
He's just called for the jury's attention and asked for the verdict.
On account of crimes against humanity or inhumane acts, how does the jury find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
From here onwards, there's no set plan or schedule for the protest. Once that verdict was read, which was guilty from the people here, the jury, in their mock trial, it was to end the protest, and it appears as people start to leave, they won't be occupying Parliament's grounds much longer. As Tamaki had said, they didn't plan to occupy Parliament's grounds overnight or in any longer the same way that they did during that 23-day occupation now 6 months ago here at Parliament. So as you can see, still a very small amount of protesters remain here at Parliament. Many have now filtered off onto the streets and left the protest. A very stark contrast to what we saw earlier this year, that 23-day occupation now 6 months ago, but still very fresh in the minds of Wellingtonians and New Zealanders. The protesters here, it all ended violently. The protesters starting a fire here. We can see shots of that riot police coming out to move the protesters off Parliament's lawns, taking the tents out, moving out onto the street. That 23-day protest and that occupation all coming to that violent end. We remember it so well. But today, a stark contrast, a rather peaceful protest. Brian Tamaki, who's led the protest, said from the start that he didn't intend it to be violent, that they would de-escalate any violence, so they wanted it to stay peaceful. He wasn't encouraging people to move concrete blocks or temporary fencing. They had their mock trial outside Parliament steps, delivered their verdict, and now have started filtering off. Only a small amount still remaining here at Parliament. Now we'll keep you up to date if anything further progresses at nzherald.co.nz. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. To stay up to date with all the latest news from the New Zealand Herald, click the subscribe button below or check out one of the videos here, and head over to nzherald.co.nz for more details on these stories and more.